This is Jake Watts, and you're listening to Pro Lacrosse Talk.
On Schreiber.
Sidearm whip, scores!
Now it's one. Padel scores! Hands off for Ravel, switches hands and scores!
Carly Omo showing off those shifty skills.
Right off the bat, there's Lyle Thompson.
Welcome to Season 2 of the Pro Lacrosse Talk podcast, the voice of Pro Lacrosse. I'm Hutton, he's Adam, and together we're bringing you interviews from all your favorite players and coaches, as well as news and analysis from all 4 professional lacrosse leagues. Welcome to another episode of Pro Lacrosse Talk. Today I'm joined by PLL analyst and head of PLL stats, Jake Watts. Jake was a part of Moneyball Lacrosse with Joe Keegan. He joined in 2017 and now works with the PLL. He's going to help us preview the PLL Championship Series today, as well as talk to you a little bit about how you can use analytics to build a winning Flow Fantasy roster. But first, Jake, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Great, man. Thank you for having me on. Really excited.
No, of course, we're really interested to hear your thoughts on these PLL rosters heading into the PLL Championship Series. We love what you guys have been doing at PLL Stats. So to start, though, I want to kind of talk about Moneyball Lacrosse, which is kind of, the forerunner to now PLL Stats. So when did you first get involved with Joe Keegan on Moneyball Lacrosse, and how did that kind of evolve into your position now?
So I got started with Moneyball Lacrosse in 2017. I actually dove in first with the NLL, where we were stat tracking and writing analytic blogs on the indoor game. And we moved to the outdoor game. So that was in 2017 that we've been working on it for a while. That's where we really started crafting the system that we're using now. Pretty innovative system that really tells the story of the game. The box score is really surface level, and I believe that what we do helps show how players score and where they score from.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I know some of the stuff you guys have been working on now with PLL Stats is some advanced statistics. What trends did you kind of find in your first year, covering the PLL? What did you kind of look at? I know you guys have some opinions on, where players dodge from, whether it's from the alley, from X, or from the wings. What were some insights that you guys found when you looked at the stats you kept during 2019?
So you're right. The first one that we saw was that dodging from up top usually tends to players fading away from the goal, providing a lower shooting angle. I think this has been like common knowledge, but we were able really to put numbers to it and show that it's pretty inefficient. Not saying that players need to avoid it altogether, but I think what we found was dodging from the wing, and especially from the two-man game, gives you a better angle at the goal and also a higher shooting percentage. So it wasn't utilized a lot this year, so we're interested to see if that's an increasing trend. And also we're trying to convince even youth coaches to start teaching this style of dodging. I mean, I've been talking to a bunch of coaches on this is like kind of what you should think about and implement earlier on, because I can remember my early lacrosse careers. It's not even taught really at the earlier levels, especially for midfielders. It's like, hey, you're going to stay up top. Don't even come down to this attackman area. So I think what we're trying to do is, just innovate the offense a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think it's important too, like you mentioned, the youth level, because, we had our Mumbo sets when I was in high school and college, but for the most part, like even in college, it was dodge from the middies, work it through X, and then redodge from up top. And as you mentioned, you're kind of limiting your shooting angle as you get closer to the cage because you're, down the alley, whereas you guys have found, like when your sticks to the inside, a lot of the Canadians kind of already know this from the box game. But you, like you said, you increase your shooting angle. So I don't know, when I sat in at LaxCon, Joe Keegan's talk, it kind of made me rethink, like, what we were even doing, in high school and college in terms of our offensive sets. And I think, it's kind of interesting too that you mentioned that, it's not just the pro level, it's at all levels this can be done. So going off of that too, what roster kind of looking at right now, do you think it's kind of set up the best to kind of work from the wings? I know the Archers did it a lot last year, but are there any of the other teams that you think set up best to kind of dodge from the wings?
Yeah, I would say number one being the Archers for sure. You've got a guy like Ryan Ambler, who's probably one of the best at dodging from the lefty wing over there. Another one being John Crawley. John Crawley is a guy that inverts, but also very good from dodging from the wing for the Atlas. Typically, they only dodge from up top last year, but they give him a little bit more opportunities from the wing. I could see that being pretty successful for them. And then I look at a team like Chaos. You've got a guy like Josh Byrne sitting on the left wing there. didn't play every single game last year, but if he's fully healthy, I mean, I think he can really dominate from that position. And then you're also bringing in newcomers like a Curtis Dixon, who I could see dodging more from that right side, that righty wing area, typically where he dodges from in the indoor game.
No, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see how some of those newer players kind of come into the fold. What are some other newer players, I guess, that you're more excited to see? It can be offensive, defensive side, but either coming over through the entry draft or even the waiver wire. Are there any players in particular you think are going to fit in the PLL style really, really well? I know we talk a lot about Zach Currier, but are there any, Zach is probably up there at the top of the list. Is there anybody else too that you think is kind of people are sleeping on because he wasn't in the PLL last year?
A guy like Eli Gobrick really stands out to me. Probably a name that not a lot of PLL fans know, but they will get to know really soon. A guy that has shown a history of dodging the best attackmen in the world, and Jordan Wolf and Rob Pinnell before. So that's a guy I'm really excited to see on the field, and joining a Archer's defense that was already one of the best in the league last year. I mean, it's just going to make them even better. And then you mentioned Zach Currier. I mean, I think the PLL is built for a guy like that. So I'm really interested to see how that plays out. But yeah, a guy like Eli, I think he's going to be a household name, and I'm really excited to see.
Yeah, no, I think Eli's going to do great on that Archer's defense that, Tony Rush got to. I forget what was how many goals did they let up? I think they were averaging around like only 10, right? 10 per game, something like that. Yeah.
Right.
So.
Yeah, they had the lowest goals per game average in the league.
Another thing I kind of wanted to talk about too that you guys have been talking a lot about on PLL stats is quote unquote punting on fourth down, which in lacrosse terms is essentially teams getting the ball behind the net with less than like 10 seconds left on the shot clock, kind of to limit the other teams from subbing and their transition offense. Talk to us about which teams kind of do that the best and how that translates to successful transition defense.
So you mentioned earlier what trends we've been seeing, and a really top trend that we've been seeing as well is transition defense is paramount to winning. And that's evident by Whip Snakes being the number 1 transition defense in the league, Redwoods being the number 2 transition defense in the league, and then your 2 last place teams, Atlas and Chrome, being the worst transition teams in the league, defensive wise. So to me, that's pretty eye-popping that it's, like I said, crucial to your team's success. So when we talk about punching on fourth down, this is actually coined by Joe Keegan. It's really, like you said, Whip Snakes get the ball to Matt Rambo really late in the shot clock, so they're able to either sub off early or pull their middies back a little bit more. I mean, you can really trust the Matt Rambo with the ball late in the stick. I mean, a one-on-one with him late in the shot clock is probably going to work out well for you either way. But that's kind of the theory behind it, is to help you transition off defense. So not everybody's collapsed towards the net. So you guys you have guys a little bit towards midfield or subbing off early, so you can get your specialists on.
And is that are teams able to do that? Is that more of a schematic thing, where the Whip Snakes implement that and they execute it really well, or is that another personnel thing too, where the Whip Snakes have good short stick defensive middies that they're able to get on, like Ty Warner, or another team like the Redwoods that have good two-way guys like Brent Adams and Sergio Perkovic? Is that kind of again a scheme thing or more of a personnel thing, do you think, or a mixture of both maybe?
I mean, it's probably a little bit of scheme and personnel. I mean, you've got for the Whip Snakes, you've got their 2 defensive middies and Jake Bernhardt and Ty Warner. And in my opinion, I think Ty Warner is in general one of the best defenders in the league, pole or no pole. So you want to get that guy on the field. Like he's can guard anybody from midfielder to attackman. So I would think that Staggs is like, hey, I need to get this guy on as many possessions as I can. And so I would say personnel definitely plays a part in it. A team like the Archers too, where they have their 2 defensive middies that they really focus on subbing in on every single one. Another Archers being another team that was really good in transition defense as well. So.
Yeah, no, and I think it's going to be interesting to see too how some newer guys come in and how teams like like a Brian Costabile is a guy that can go both ways. So it'll be interesting how he can kind of upgrade that Atlas midfield a little bit. I want to kind of go into now the goalies a little bit, because you mentioned now that we have a championship series and a lot of games back to back or within days of apart, teams are going to really need to utilize a 2-goalie system. The Archers did it last year to some success. We saw the Chrome kind of switch up their goalie play a little bit, but the Archers were really the only team that actually used the 2-goalie system. Do you think more teams this summer are going to use that? And what are the kind of the best rosters right now with 2 goalies, do you think?
Yeah, I could see a couple teams using it. For sure the Archers. I mean, I look at a team like Chaos. I know Andy Towers mentioned in the past that he's probably not going to utilize it a lot, but when you got a guy like Dylan Ward sitting on your bench, I mean, I don't see why not using him. And then Blaze, you got the goalie of the year. For me, because of the shortened tournament, it's like you can't really ride out like a bad quarter, a couple bad quarters, a 5-goal run. Every goal is going to matter in this tournament. In a 10-game season, you're able to, all right, he can have one bad game or one bad half, and we'll ride that out. So for me, I think these coaches are just going to have a tighter leash on a goalie, depending on the flow of the game. If it's late in the third quarter and your guy lets in 3 or 4 in a row, like, can you ride that out when you really need to be fighting for a win? Just because for me, the number 1 seed in this tournament is crucial, right? Because 2 through 7, you're going to have a tough matchup. Every team is tough. So you want to be able to secure that number 1 seed, 1, to play less games, and then 2, you don't have to play in the first round. But yeah, so that was kind of my view on the 2-goalie system. I don't think it's necessary. I think I did mention that in my tweet. I probably reworded that wrong. I think it will help. But when you got a guy like Kyle Bernlohr, who in my opinion is best goalie in the world, you may just ride that guy out, because he's so good. So it really probably depend on coaching philosophy. But I do think it could be used to an advantage.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it will be interesting to see, too, like a team like the Water Dogs that have Charlie Cipriano and then Matt DeLuca, 2 guys that, weren't starters last year, competing for that spot, who they go with. And, again, back to the whether they have a shorter leash, depending on who is their starter. Going off of that, too, I want to get a little bit, more into the roster construction. You have some teams like the Chrome that decided to take a lot of defenders. You have some other teams that maybe went offensive heavy, like the Chaos. What were your takeaways from some of these roster constructions? And what, I guess, without saying which one do you think is the best, what are some takeaways, I guess, from those teams that leaned on the defensive side more and those that leaned on the offensive side more?
I think the Chrome was a response to last year, right? Their defense really struggled. So they brought in a lot of new guys, like a Jesse Bernhardt, who's going to be a huge difference maker for their team. And 2, their offense wasn't broken. They had the number 1 settled offense in the league. So you could rely on those 6 to 7 guys to duplicate that this year. So I think that was kind of their focus, and bringing more defenders is that needed to be their focus, because it was obviously a weakness last year. And then as far as Chaos, I am interested to see how they implement all those offensive players. I mean, they've got like five guys that can play attack, 6 guys that can play attack. Like, how often are they going to sub those guys in? For me, I mean, I look at a roster like the Water Dogs really intrigues me for a tournament like this. I mean, I think Andy Copeland, he had an advantage to watch an entire full season of PLL Lacrosse and understand the flow and the needs of the game. So for him to be able to handpick guys that can play 2-way, can stay on the field, I think is going to be, a big advantage for them. Like he's obviously going for the tactic of trying to keep those defensive specialists off the field, like we mentioned earlier. So if their offensive middies can transition back and forth and stay on for multiple runs, it's really hard for those defensive players like a Ty Warner or the Archers 2 guys, Dominique and Mark McNeil. It's hard to sub them on when the offensive middies are staying on.
Yeah, no, and you got, again, probably nobody better to do that than Zach Courier. Danny Ipe they added also at the midfield. So you got a lot of guys there. Even Ben McIntosh, who's, more of an offensive guy, can also probably, go both ways, keep people on the field as well. And then going off of that too, anybody from the waiver wire that kind of stood out to you? I know I in particular have one guy that I'm really excited to see, but anybody like that you think was a huge pickup in the waiver wire that maybe somebody or some people are sleeping on because they weren't going through this entry draft?
I I mean, it's got to be for sure Jake Withers. I mean, he's a stud face-off man that is kind of like a Joe Nardella. He can stay in the field. He can dodge. He can play defense. Like he's just a guy that is going to be a huge asset for their team. So another reason why I'm excited to watch the Water Dogs. So yeah, that's got to be the number one waiver wire pickup for sure. We haven't seen Jake Withers play on the field in over a year, but a Team Canada face-off guy, a guy that has dominated in the indoor game, and now we get to see him in the PLL. I think that was a huge pickup for them.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Pro Lacrosse Talk podcast. Today I want to talk to you about our sponsor, Anchor. We've been using Anchor for the Pro Lacrosse Talk podcast since the very start. Anchor gives you everything you need in one place, and better yet, it's free. They allow you to easily record and edit your podcast, and once it's published, they send it out to all the major networks such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and many more. They also connect you with advertisers so you can start making money from your podcast right away. So if you're thinking about starting a podcast today, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Today I also want to talk to you about Phoenix supplements. I started using Phoenix supplements after searching for a supplement brand that didn't use any unnecessary additives. Phoenix's line of supplements use only the required ingredients and is free of any fillers that many supplement companies use. Not only that, but their supplements are produced here in the US in an FDA-regulated facility. And the best part is they taste really good. I personally like using the Orange Dreamsicle protein blend in the morning, and I use their chocolate whey following workouts. So if you're interested in trying Phoenix supplements, visit their website, fnxfit.com, and use the code PROLACROSSE to receive 15% off your order today.
So that kind of it brings us to the fantasy aspect of things. You know, Flow Fantasy is doing their own challenge. It's separate from the PLL, but we are, kind of preparing. Maybe the PLL does fantasy down the road. But going off of, what you've seen from these rosters, who are some guys that you like? Let's start off, I guess, with the polls. I'll remind everybody what the point system is. So you have goals are 4 points, assists are 5 points, 2-point goals are 7 points, caused turnovers are 7 points, a ground ball gets you 1 point, and then a turnover is -2 points. And then in addition to that, you also have goalies and face-offs specialists will both start off at 6 points, and then based on their percentage, they will get either positive or negative points. So almost like a defense in fantasy football right there. But let's start off with the long polls. Who's a long poll, either defender or LSM, that you really think should be at the top of people's draft boards based on their production last year?
Number one, for sure, Garrett Epple. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious based off this the scoring system. 7 points for a caused turnover, and then you have the guy that led the league in caused turnovers last year. Is going to be huge. And also, he's a ground ball machine too, so he just stacks on points that way. I actually attached the point system to the PLL stats last year, and he was the number one point getter in overall total points in the league. Caveat to that was 30% of those points came against Chrome, their first game that they played. He had like 10 ground balls and 7 caused turnovers. It was like 63 points or something like that. So that's something you need to consider. Like, is he going to put up another game like that? Either way, I still think he's probably one of the best defenders in the league. A guy that does a lot of things, and based off the point structure of caused turnovers and ground balls, being pretty substantial, that's a guy that you can ignore and possibly look at drafting number one overall.
No, absolutely. We actually beta tested a draft, and he went number one overall in our beta test. So I definitely think he's high on my draft board as well. And then what about, offensive middies and attackmen? We mentioned that assists are worth more than goals. So that means like a guy like, Grant Amon's going to probably get more points than a Will Manny, who he's feeding. Not that Will can't feed as well, but the feeders are going to benefit from that a little bit more. Is there anybody that you think, people should take right away? And is there also maybe a sleeper that you think, is going to get you a lot of assists that people maybe aren't thinking about?
Well, attack-wise, you got to look at Matt Rambo, number one. Led the league in assists last year. So, like you talked about, that point being valuable. He's got to be one of your go-tos. A guy like Justin Getterding. I really got my eyes on Josh Byrne. I mentioned him earlier. A guy that didn't play every single game last year, but when I was doing points per game for the fantasy points, he came out second amongst attackmen. So that's a guy you really got to look at. in terms of picking attackmen. And then after that, you got to look at the two attackmen. Honestly, three on the Redwoods. I mean, they're all pretty solid. I don't think you can go bad with either Ryder, Matt, or Jules. But those are some guys to keep an eye on. And then as far as for the midfield position, I really focus on a guy like Jake Vaccaro. He and Tom Sharber are the number 1 and number 2 picks. Tom being the best assister out of the two. Mm-hmm. But because of the point structure, the ball's in Tom's hands so much. He had the most turnovers last year for midfielders. And so, that's a little bit of a negative in the fantasy world, right? It's like we all would pick Tom being a 1 or 2 top player in the world. But when you're thinking about, point structure, the fact that he turned the ball over so much hurt him just a tad bit. But I don't think that's too much of a negative there. A guy like John Haas, too, like a guy that never turns the ball over, is really valuable, right? Because you're not getting negative points. So I think that's a guy you could look at for sure. So those are some of the guys I and a guy like Jordan McIntosh didn't get a lot of assists, but just like puts the ball in the back of the net. So you can really depend on that.
For sure. I think those are some great sleepers, both Jordan McIntosh and John Haas, because we saw what they did both for their respective teams. McIntosh had that huge game in that first win for the Chrome, and then John Haas hat-trick in the championship last season. So, yeah, I think those are two guys people should look at. And then that brings us kind of to the goaltenders, too. We mentioned that it's based on save percentage. Would you take a goalie with the higher save percentage, or is it going to kind of depend on whether they use a 2-goalie system for who you're going to pick?
Right, yeah. It really – because it's dependent on save percentage. You got a guy like Drew Adams who led the league in save percentage, but he played obviously less minutes, and that helps, right? You don't see as many shots, so you're able to, not let as many in. So that's a guy you need to look at. And then obviously Blaze. He saw the most shots last year and still had the highest save percentage. Like, that's pretty impressive to me, because he just was getting pelted by shots and still stopping a ton. And then obviously Kyle Bernlohr. Those would probably be the 3 guys I would really look at. And then when you think about defenses, Whip Snakes and Archers are playing in front of Bernlohr and Adams. Like, that's something you have to consider too. So because Blaze had the best percentage, like his defense didn't like help him as much as they should last year. Just getting pelted. So when you have the Whip Snakes and the Archers D playing in front of those 2 guys, like, I think that's a huge advantage as well, because they're putting guys in better positions shooting wise, like putting them in spots that Kyle and Drew, they want to see shots from the alleys, not in the middle of the field. So that's what you got to consider.
That's a great point. And then we mentioned the face-off guys a little bit too, another key position, where it's also dependent on face-off percentage. We know we have the Trevor Baptiste and the Joe Nardellas of the world, but they're going to be on the top of everyone's board. But I guess who's an underrated face-off specialist? You might have mentioned him already with Jake Withers. Is there anybody else too that you would maybe consider if you decide not to take a face-off guy right away, maybe get in later rounds?
Stephen Kelly for sure would be one of those guys that you could probably snag a little later and still get some solid points from. A guy that can stay on the field. I even saw him like take the ball to X last year and start dodging. Like what other face-off guy do you really see do that? And another one that his 2 system helps him out face-off percentage-wise. He's got Brendan Fowler really grinding guys out, having long face-offs, and then coming in, and then Steven coming in, getting a quick face-off next. We've heard guys talk about On the Stripe, Greg Grimley's new face-off podcast, like how that's been difficult for them to go up against Brendan, and then you have Stephen Kelly come in right after with a different style and way faster and athletic, and it's tougher than just seeing the same guy the whole game.
Absolutely. And then you mentioned, the Stripe. I want to talk about that a little bit, because you're assisting Greg Renlian on his new podcast that the PLL just launched. How have you helped him with, taking a deeper look into the face-off position, and how, what has been some good insights that you found when you're, doing some research for him on that podcast?
Yeah, so that started out by him just asking me for a couple of stats and ended up turning into, some really cool information. So I rewatched all 37 games and advanced stat track the faceoff position. So traditionally, we only looked at faceoff guys of win-loss, faceoff percentage, and GBs, and that was pretty it. And I think there's a lot more intricacies that go into the position and the situation than people take account for. So that was kind of the thought process, is we wanted to educate the fans, both new and old, of like what actually goes into these matchups. And so what we really wanted to look at is clamp percentage. First and foremost is like who's getting to the ball first, right? The clamp is the initial control of the ball, and it was obvious to see that Tommy Kelly of Chaos, he's got the fastest hands in the league. His clamp percentage was over 70%. His overall face-off percentage suffered a little bit. So right there, that can tell us, like, hey, he's not utilizing his wings as best as he should, or his exits aren't what they need to be. And so when he goes on the podcast, he talks about these things. Like, those are the things he's kind of had to adjust to with the new PLL rules. Of mainly the field size, right? You've cut out 10 yards in the middle of the field, and you've brought those wings closer, and that's really affected those guys at the face-off dot on how they need to quickly get out of there or how they need to scoop the ball out. So then after that, we really tried to dive into the wings. So we tracked out who picked up the ball, whether it was the face-off guy themselves or the wing player. So this kind of highlights guys that you don't typically see. Like a Ty Warner was really, really good at picking up GBs off the wing. Number one being Scott Ratliff, but he's a household name. Everybody knows he's a beast on the field. And two being Joel White, the human vacuum himself. But it really goes in to show you kind of who utilized those the most. You have like a guy like Trevor Baptiste, who led the league in wing GBs. So if, a guy like Tommy could adjust his style a little bit to communicate with those wings better, you could really see his face-off percentage skyrocket if he makes those adjustments.
No, absolutely. I've enjoyed listening to Greg talk. He's great to listen to, so insightful. And as a non-face-offs guy myself, I never took face-offs. It's just interesting to kind of get in the mindset of a face-off guy. So I really like what you guys are doing with that podcast. The final thing I kind of want to end on is, the PLL just introduced betting. So I kind of want to talk about a little bit, like there was one nugget that I saw on PLL stats. I think people, if they follow PLL stats, it's really going to help them make informed betting decisions, because there's one crazy stat that you tweeted out that Ryder Garnsey shot 50%, 7 for 14 in the fourth quarter. Best percentage, you said, and second most in goals among shooters with at least 10 fourth quarter shots. That's just crazy to me that half his goals went in the fourth quarter. And I think, we're still not sure what we're going to see from betting in the PLL, but if there are prop bets kind of like that, if there's a prop bet that's, who's going to score a game winner or whatever, you kind of want to put your money on Ryder Garnsey. So I guess make the pitch for why people should follow PLL stats if they're planning on betting this summer.
I mentioned earlier we wanted to tell the story of the game, and so we wanted to be a resource for fans, both betting and non-betting. And so, but through the betting lens, what we're showing you is the different styles of teams and specifically how they match up against, others. So if you want to see how the Chaos defends against ex-attackmen, like we're going to show that. You want to see who's good at scoring in transition, who's not. It's pretty valuable information to see. And also we go into a lot of, assisted and unassisted shooting looks. Like a team like the Redwoods gave up the most assisted goals. That means that they're sliding a lot to that first guy. All right. So, and on the inverse, that they gave up the least amount of unassisted goals. So that Dodger that comes off the top, that they're sliding to him quick. They're not letting him get that shot off. And I think that's one of the reasons why you saw them beat Chrome twice in a row, a team that was really prone to unassisted goals, really relying on that one-on-one dodge to get their shots off. So just like nuggets like that to see the different styles and how they match up, I think is very valuable for fans to understand the game and also understand, where you should place your money.
No, yeah, I think it's awesome what you guys are doing with PLL stats, both on, a micro level and a macro level too. I think you're going to give new fans, opportunity to kind of increase their IQ for lacrosse, which is important. If someone's new to the game, they want to understand it. And I think, PLL Stats is one of those ways they can kind of, have higher conversations with it. So we really appreciate you coming on, Jake. Where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter at Jake Watts, Watts with the Z at the end. I've got the caricature image on there. That's my main platform that I use. Really tweeting out, nuggets all the time, posting articles that we put on the website. So yeah, at Jake Watts on Twitter is where you can find me.
All right, well, Jake, we really appreciate you coming on. It's been awesome talking to you, kind of taking an analytical approach. I myself am not too caught up on the analytics, so it's nice to kind of read, again, like what you guys do on PLL Stats. I feel like I'm kind of learning a lot every day, and we're really looking forward to this championship series and you guys breaking it down. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, man. Awesome being here, and thank you for what you do. The lacrosse community talks about growing the game all the time, but you creating a platform for the sport is evidence of that, so appreciate that.
Today I also want to talk to you about Tomahawk Shades. Tomahawk Shades have an array of both quality sunglasses and blue light glasses at a fraction of the cost of popular sunglass brands. Their blue light glasses are perfect for guys like me who spend hours looking at a computer screen when editing. They also have a great collection of sunglasses with pro athletes like Kylie Ohlmiller, Kyle Harrison, Mike Chanichuk, and Chris Hogan repping the brand. So if you want a pair of the shades the pros wear, visit tomahawkshades.com and use the code PLT20 to save 20% on your order today.